Now look, I could have written this entire list of hated retcons specifically about the things that were changed in the New 52, but arguably the New 52's biggest crime was that it was extremely unclear at any given time what was and was not canon anymore. Even worse than that is that it wasn't clear how anything even fit together. For example, in the New 52, every Green Lantern event ever had apparently now taken place across less than 5 years. That doesn't make any sense. Or there's the little Batman and the rest of the family having to have operated as an urban legend for an unbelievably long amount of time, especially for Damian Wayne to make any sense at all. Speaking of them though, Barbara Gordon was still paralyzed by the Joker, but it was only for like a year now. The thing that really irks people is that DC probably could have cleared up all of that with like a one shot simply laying out the new timeline for various characters, but they didn't. The Crisis on Infinite Earths was one of DC's first ever massive big retconning events. It essentially got rid of DC's Multiverse, which was highly controversial and also deemed somewhat unnecessary by others, which has turned out to be true as they've gone back on that completely since. But initially they did it in a way that is just baffling. Superboy Prime, from an alternate reality himself, got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he just punched a hole in reality. He punched reality so hard, the multiverse came back. That's it. That's the point. Thank you. You're welcome. Now again in the New 52 era, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was not a founding member of the team, a place that he held for years. Instead, now his spot was taken by Cyborg, who was now created thanks to a mother box. This had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans, meaning it was erased completely. I personally liked the change just a little bit, because I've always felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites, but at the same time, Martian Manhunter is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be the one of the original defenders of the planet. It may be a weak argument, and I know that many people weren't too happy with the changes at all to both the JLA and the Titans, but let me know your thoughts down below. But Wonder Woman was actually done dirty in an incredibly similar way as Martian Manhunter was, only for her, this happened much earlier, all the way back in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like the Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman lost her original spot as a founding member of the Justice League thanks to the Crisis. Following that event, Wonder Woman's history was changed so that her first appearance in continuity occurred with her reintroduction in 1987. This meant that all of her history, particularly with the Justice League, was basically now null and void. The solution was to instead put Black Canary in her place. Now, look, I like Black Canary, she's cool and all, but she's no Wonder Woman, man. This decision was incredibly unpopular, and so Wonder Woman got her position back eventually, but that ultimately also tied into the history of Wonder Woman, which itself is just a big ol' mess full of retcons. But instead of talking about that, I want to touch on a retcon that changed the Amazons themselves. Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman is largely liked and supported by fans, but there is one thing it did which kind of made the Amazons seem like monsters. Basically, this story adds that every 3 decades, the Amazons will actually go outside of Themyscira and will raid ships and basically sleep with the sailors in order to make more Amazons. It shows them doing this, but at the end of their little excursion, they wipe out all the men they had slept with and throw them overboard. And any male children they create end up being sold off to other nations and factions of people. The original story of the Amazons is basically established as a means of female empowerment, but this new origin is basically going 180 on that idea by making them into monsters and pretty much savages. What is really weak about this retcon is that it has a massive plot hole in it, and that is that Wonder Woman has no idea of this evil backstory at all. It's a cool concept, but one that ultimately goes nowhere in the story, and it just makes the Amazons seem kinda evil. Superman's origin story has been retold countless times. Kal-El's parents sent him to Earth as his homeworld, Krypton, was destroyed. Now, the exact details of how it was destroyed have morphed and reshaped over the many years since, but historically the destruction of Krypton has been largely a natural disaster. Then came along Brian Michael Bendis and the introduction of Rogal Zar. Essentially, Rogal Zar was an alien humanoid monster who was now responsible for the destruction of Superman's home world. But he was also a creation of Superman's own father, Jor-El. As you can imagine, that little tidbit did not land well well with pretty much anyone, and it also came across as super unnecessary. Sure, it gave a face to the destruction of a home that Superman probably doesn't even remember, and it even gave a familial connection between the monster and Superman, but it also makes Jor-El responsible for the destruction of himself, his wife, and his planet. I don't like it. On many other lists like this, I have talked about the origin of Hawkman, but mainly how it's so overly convoluted because of the sheer amount of retcons done to the character, making it hard to follow exactly what his origin and story is. One of those origins involved an Elseworld story known as Hawkworld. Hawkworld became so popular, what was once a one-shot became a series and then eventually became actual canon. The consequences of that happening was that the entire legacy of Hawkman during the Silver Age was completely erased for that to work. I feel like DC does this a lot. There have been so many DC retcons that I've looked at where characters have entire chunks of their already established lore just cut out, and it's never ever a great time for those characters or for the fans who are trying to follow along. We should probably stop doing that. Speaking of that though, when Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So when Barry got powers, he took on the identity to honor him, making the original Jay Garrick Flash a cosplayer. Thankfully, this was retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally was transported to Jay's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that he had remembered and then written down. As Barry explained it, obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was turned in on Jay's vibratory Earth. This is a weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe, as this is also the introduction of the DC Multiverse and eventually led to the Crisis on Infinite Earths. One of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC's comic book history both in the actual continuity and in real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspects of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like such a strange choice to make. There are characters who now existed that themselves are the legacy characters of some of those who are in the Justice Society, meaning that now those legacy characters need to explain how that still makes sense. Following Backlash, it was changed back to normal, thankfully. And lastly, I want to talk about Brainiac. Post-Crisis, Brainiac was an alien scientist who possessed a psychic named Milton Fine. After a number of stories, Brainiac ditched Fine's body, and after his attempts at stealing new bodies are thwarted, he builds a robotic body for himself and calls himself Brainiac 2.5. Then, when trying to upgrade himself, Brainiac's future self, called Brainiac 13, travels back in time and possesses his present self. Even though Brainiac was eventually wiped out in the event comic Our Worlds at War, we still saw him return with no actual explanation, but this time he returned as a swarm of nanomachines, and in that storyline, Brainiac was reintroduced, and Supergirl explained that all the versions that we saw before were just probes sent by the real Brainiac. If it sounds like the previous versions of Brainiac being probes sent by the original makes no sense when one of them came from the future, it's because it doesn't make sense. And it's even more confusing because this Brainiac is based on his incarnation from the DC animated universe, who collects cities to gain knowledge from planets and then destroys those planets. The previous Brainiacs we saw were out to rule the universe, so that means that the real Brainiac sent out probes who had goals that were completely different than his actual goal. With that though, my name is Adam Andrews. As always, I will catch you guys on the flippy flop, so stay safe, keep positive, and peace out, you nerds.